Loneliness for Rick Sanchez doesn't begin with being alone. It begins with being understood too late. From the moment he steps into any room, the world seems smaller, slower, almost fragile under the weight of his mind. He dismantles problems before others even realize they exist, pulls meaning apart until it collapses into absurdity, and laughs at the ruins. To most, that looks like arrogance. To Rick, it's survival. Genius isolates him, not because he wants it to, but because it must. Every revelation widens the gap between him and everyone else, until even love feels like a misunderstanding. His intelligence, his invention, his endless exploration of the infinite, they're not tools for discovery, but distractions from silence. Because in that silence, beneath the calculations and quips, is the echo of a truth he cannot outthink. That for all the universes he's mapped, he's still alone in every one of them. Rick's loneliness is not loud. It hides beneath sarcasm, in the spaces between his words, in the hesitation before he finishes a joke. His laughter often sounds like relief, as if he's trying to drown out a thought that almost broke through. In the lab, surrounded by his creations, he finds control. But control is not comfort, it's a form of denial. Every portal is a door to a world where something might have gone differently. But every return reminds him that difference never lasts. No matter the universe, the equation resolves the same way. He is the constant. The one who knows too much to stay content, and too proud to admit that knowledge has become a cage. When Rick looks at Morty, he sees both the past and the future, the version of himself that still believes in meaning, and the version that will lose it. He watches Morty's innocence decay through exposure to cosmic truth, and though he mocks it, part of him grieves it. There's a tenderness buried under all the insults, a kind of sorrow disguised as guidance. Rick knows what comes after curiosity, after wonder, after the moment when the universe reveals its indifference. It's not power, not enlightenment. It's emptiness. And yet, he can't stop dragging Morty toward it, because to him, ignorance is cruelty. He thinks he's saving Morty from illusion, but what he's really doing is recreating his own fall, ensuring he never has to face the guilt of being the only one who understands. Rick's loneliness is the shadow of his awareness. He doesn't isolate himself because he hates people, but because being near them reminds him of what he's lost. Connection demands vulnerability, and vulnerability is a language he's long forgotten. In his world, every emotion is a potential weakness to be analysed, every attachment a future wound. The walls he builds around himself are transparent. Everyone can see through them, but no one can reach through. When Beth tries, when Morty tries, even when Bird Person tries, he recoils, not out of malice, but fear. Genuine care forces him to look at the parts of himself he's spent years erasing. It reminds him that the smartest man in the universe still couldn't outsmart his own pain. To understand Rick's loneliness, you have to see the difference between solitude and isolation. Solitude is chosen, isolation is endured. Rick confuses the two. He tells himself he prefers being alone, that family ties and friendships are distractions. But his constant return to them, the way he hovers at the edges of the Smith household, never fully leaving, betrays that lie. He is addicted to proximity, to the warmth he refuses to touch. His loneliness is self-inflicted, but it's also a cry for contradiction. He wants to be seen and unseen at the same time. He wants someone to look past his defenses without him having to lower them. And when they don't, when they treat him exactly as he pretends to want, he calls them idiots and drinks to forget the disappointment. Rick's mind works like a machine built to avoid stillness. He fills every second with chaos, every thought with noise. The more he invents, the less he feels. But emotion doesn't disappear, it compresses. His loneliness gathers density, becoming something gravitational. It pulls everything toward him, people, worlds, memories, and then crushes them under its weight. The people who orbit him, like Morty or Beth, get caught in that gravity. They love him, but they can't survive too close for long. Rick knows this, and it terrifies him, because the one thing lonelier than being alone is watching everyone leave because of you. There's a cruel poetry to how Rick hides his pain. Every time he says, "Don't think about it," he's begging himself to do the same. Every time he mocks someone's attachment, he's mourning his own. His loneliness manifests not in silence, but in constant motion, the endless search for another dimension, another distraction, another version of himself who didn't break. But the multiverse offers no salvation, only mirrors. In every reflection, he sees the same tired eyes, the same flask, the same hollow laughter. The universe is maybe infinite, but his loneliness is consistent. That's the cosmic joke he can't laugh at anymore. Sometimes, in the quiet aftermath of an adventure, when Morty's asleep and the portal gun hums softly on the table, Rick sits alone and lets the weight of everything settle. His mind, for once, doesn't race ahead. He thinks about the people he's lost, the things he's destroyed in the name of truth, and the simple moments that slipped past him while he was busy proving a point. He remembers laughter that wasn't forced, warmth that wasn't earned, love that didn't need to be justified. Those memories hurt more than any failure, because for all his power, Rick can't recreate sincerity. He can clone bodies, rebuild worlds, bend time, but he can't invent meaning. Loneliness, for Rick, is a consequence of mastery. The more he understands, the less he belongs. He's solved too many mysteries to still believe in wonder, and yet, somewhere deep inside, he craves it. That's why he keeps going on adventures with Morty, not for science, not for chaos, but for glimpses of something he thought he'd lost. Morty's fear, his awe, his outrage at injustice, they remind Rick of emotions that once made life worth living. It's why he pushes him away and pulls him back in equal measure. Morty represents both the cure and the cause of his loneliness. Being near him keeps Rick tethered to humanity, but it also exposes how far he's drifted from it. In a way, Rick's loneliness is philosophical. It's the natural end of pure logic. When you dismantle every illusion, question every truth, and reduce existence to math and molecules, what's left to connect you to anything? Rick's nihilism is not a belief system, it's a scar. He didn't choose it, he built it to survive disappointment. Once you've seen infinite versions of yourself, each equally doomed, meaning becomes a statistical error. But the irony is that even after understanding all that, he still cares. He still shows up. He still builds, still teaches, still risks. That contradiction is what keeps him alive. The faint hope that maybe, somewhere between reason and chaos, he'll find a feeling that doesn't dissolve under scrutiny. There are moments when his loneliness slips through the cracks. A quiet, "I'm sorry," muttered under his breath. A glance that lingers too long. A favour done without acknowledgement. Those are the places where the armour fractures. But he always repairs it quickly, afraid of what might pour out if he doesn't. Vulnerability feels more dangerous than any alien war, any collapsing timeline. It's the one battle he's sure he'll lose. Yet every once in a while, when Morty says something kind without expecting anything in return, Rick's expression softens. The loneliness doesn't leave, but it shifts from something that isolates to something that aches toward connection. It's fleeting, but it's real. Rick's loneliness is also cosmic. It's not just personal grief, but existential awareness. He's not only the smartest man in the universe, he's the one who truly grasps how empty it is. Every atom, every law of physics, every loop of time, all whisper the same thing. There is no ultimate meaning. For most people, that's unbearable. For Rick, it's background noise. He's learned to live with it, to find small, temporary joys in a meaningless universe. But even that adaptation costs him something, the ability to feel awe. Wonder requires a little ignorance, and Rick's knowledge stripped him of it long ago, and yet, beneath all the cynicism, there's still a spark that refuses to die. It's what keeps him from ending it, from disappearing into another reality permanently. It's the part of him that still builds, still teaches, still laughs. With Morty, even after swearing, he wouldn't care. That's the paradox of Rick Sanchez. His loneliness defines him, but it also humanizes him. It's the evidence that, despite everything he says, he still wants to belong. His genius may have separated him from others, but it also gives him the capacity to see the absurdity of his isolation. Sometimes, the most self-aware person in the room is also the most desperate for connection. Rick's loneliness is not meant to be solved. It's a companion he carries through every portal, every timeline, every drunken monologue. It keeps him alive because it keeps him searching. And in that search there's something almost holy, a relentless pursuit of truth even when it hurts. The tragedy is that the truth he's chasing might never fill the space it left behind. But maybe that's not the point. Maybe loneliness, for Rick Sanchez, is not a punishment, but a reminder. A reminder that even in an infinite universe, meaning is something you create, not something you find. And sometimes, the act of creating it, even through pain, through chaos, through laughter that hides a tear, is enough to make existence bearable. Love, for Rick Sanchez, is an equation that never balances. It's the one variable he can't solve, no matter how many times he tries to rewrite the formula. Every attempt at connection, every relationship he's ever had, collapses under the same gravitational truth, that to love means to need, and to need means to be vulnerable. And vulnerability is something he exiled from himself long ago. He can disassemble an atom, a god, a dimension, but not the ache that comes when someone looks at him and means it. Love terrifies him because it's not logical, not predictable. It asks for surrender, for the one thing he doesn't know how to give, himself. Rick's loneliness doesn't exist in opposition to love. It feeds on it. The more he feels, the more it hurts. Every tender memory becomes radioactive, something he can't touch without burning. That's why he hides behind mockery. When he insults someone who cares for him, it's not contempt, it's self-defense. To him, affection feels like a countdown to loss. Every I love you is a prelude to goodbye. Somewhere deep inside, he believes that love and pain are synonymous, that to open the door is to invite devastation. So he locks it over and over, and then drinks himself numb to forget that he's the one holding the key. His marriage, his friendships, even his bond with Beth, each carries the echo of love, distorted by guilt. He's haunted by the knowledge that he leaves wreckage behind, even when he means well. The paradox is cruel. Rick is capable of immense love, but incapable of expressing it safely. His affection becomes a weapon, sharp with honesty, cold with fear. He teaches the people around him that emotions are liabilities, yet he can't stop feeling them himself. The disconnect corrodes him. He longs to be understood, but sabotages anyone who tries. His loneliness becomes cyclical, a self-sustaining system of hope and destruction. Rick's love is also selective. It gravitates toward those who remind him of something he's lost or wants to protect from himself. Beth, the daughter who reflects his mind and his pain, becomes the mirror he avoids. When she looks at him, he sees both legacy and consequence. She's what remains of his humanity, and also the proof of his failure to preserve it. Their connection is tender, bitter, impossible to define. He wants her to love him, but not to become him. Yet the more she learns from him, the more she resembles him, and that resemblance hurts more than rejection. With Morty, it's different. Morty represents the version of Rick that still believes love can mean something. Rick never says it outright, but every time he risks his life for Morty, every time he saves him without admitting it, love leaks through the cracks. It's quiet, hidden beneath insults and sarcasm, but it's there. He teaches Morty about the emptiness of the universe, not because he wants him to despair, but because he wants him to survive it. In a twisted way, that's love too, preparing someone for the pain you couldn't handle. It's not nurturing, it's protection through disillusionment. There are moments when Rick lets love win, even for a breath, when he sacrifices control to save someone else, when he lets his guard down enough to share a memory, when he chooses not to run. Those moments are fleeting but profound. They show the man beneath the mask, the one who still remembers what it felt like to hold someone without fear. He buries that man under layers of intellect and irony, but he never truly disappears. That's why Rick can never stop coming back to the people he loves. He can leave for years, for lifetimes, but something in him always returns. Love, for him, is gravity, invisible, irresistible, inescapable. Rick's understanding of love is fractured by loss. Somewhere in the infinite, there's a version of him who watched his wife die, who lost Beth for real, who stood in a garage surrounded by ghosts. That trauma bleeds through every version of him. Even when continuity shifts, even when the timeline resets, the grief remains. It's encoded in his silence, in the way he avoids eye contact when emotions surface, in the bitterness that laces every apology. Love became dangerous the moment it became mortal, and since then, he's been trying to outthink mortality itself, as if immortality could replace intimacy. But it can't. It only prolongs the ache. There's a deep irony in how Rick expresses care. He doesn't know how to say, "I love you," so he says, "Don't be stupid." He doesn't know how to comfort, so he mocks. He doesn't know how to stay, so he builds a portal. His actions are coded in sarcasm, but the intention beneath them is pure. He feels too deeply, too destructively, to show it directly. If love is vulnerability, then every time he chooses not to destroy something, he's loving in the only way he knows how, through restraint, his problem. Isn't that he can't love, it's that he feels too much of it to bear. Rick's loneliness sharpens when love threatens to soften him. The closer someone gets, the louder the alarms in his mind sound. He starts pushing, testing, sabotaging. He needs proof that they'll leave, because that way it won't surprise him when they do. It's a cycle as old as his pain. Attachment, fear, destruction, guilt. Every repetition deepens the pattern, carving his loneliness into something permanent. Yet the fact that he keeps entering the cycle again and again, that he still reaches out, even when he knows how it ends, means that part of him hasn't given up. Hope hides in his despair. The tragedy is that Rick understands love too well to trust it. He knows it's chemical, evolutionary, transient. He's seen how easily it breaks across universes, but knowing that doesn't erase the longing. Logic can't quiet the heart. So he oscillates between indulgence and rejection. He drinks, He laughs, he flirts, he saves, he runs. His mind tries to simplify what his soul refuses to, and in that war between intellect and emotion, loneliness becomes the mediator, the only constant that doesn't lie. It's the reminder that for all his brilliance, he's still human enough to hurt. Sometimes, in rare moments of honesty, he admits it to himself. Maybe not in words, but in the silence that follows them. A look at Beth across the dinner table. A half-hearted toast no one understands. A hand trembling as he reaches for another drink. Love flickers through him like static, brief, and painful. He could erase it, repress it, even forget it entirely. But he doesn't, because no matter how much it hurts, it's proof he's still alive. Love is the last thing he hasn't reduced to theory. It's the one force he still lets surprise him, even when it breaks him. That's why his loneliness isn't absolute. Beneath all the bravado, he still believes, maybe not in forever, but in fragments of meaning. A kind word, a shared laugh, a fleeting moment of connection that survives the absurdity of everything else. Those fragments are what tether him to the people he pretends not to need. They're small, imperfect, but real. In the endless expanse of universes, that's enough to keep him from disappearing entirely. Rick's love may never look like anyone else's, but it's still love, raw, damaged, alive. His loneliness, then, becomes a byproduct of love unexpressed. It's the space between emotion and articulation, between what he feels and what he allows the world to see. The more he hides it, the more it grows. But the fact that it still grows means there's something left inside him to give. He can't destroy love, only distort it, and maybe that's why he'll never escape loneliness, because deep down, he doesn't want to. Love gives shape to his pain. Without it, even emptiness would lose meaning. Meaning, for Rick Sanchez, is the cruelest illusion of all. It's what the universe dangles in front of you, so you'll keep moving, keep building, keep surviving, long enough to realize that none of it was ever real. Rick has seen behind the curtain too many times to believe in purpose. He's torn reality apart, molecule by molecule, peered into infinite versions of himself, and found the same empty center waiting in all of them. To him, existence isn't a story. It's an experiment with no hypothesis and no conclusion. And yet, that understanding doesn't free him, it traps him. Because once you've seen the emptiness, you can't unsee it. Once you've proved that nothing matters, you still have to wake up and decide what to do with that knowledge. Rick's nihilism isn't cold, it's wounded. It's not the philosophy of someone who never cared, but of someone who cared so much that it broke him. When he says nothing means anything, what he's really saying is that meaning failed him. Every belief, every ideal, every version of truth he once clung to dissolved under scrutiny. The universe didn't betray him, it simply revealed itself. That's the heartbreak of genius, to understand too much to participate sincerely. He still plays the game of life, but he does it with a smirk, aware that the rules were never real. Every adventure, every invention, every burst of chaos is a distraction from the silence that follows the punchline. Rick's collapse of meaning began long before the multiverse. It began the moment he realized that discovery doesn't lead to peace. As a young man, his brilliance must have felt like a gift. The power to shape reality, to know what others couldn't. But knowledge without purpose becomes poison. The more he learned, the less he could believe. Every discovery stripped another layer of mystery from the world, until nothing sacred remained. What's left after you understand everything? Nothing but maintenance, keeping the machine of existence running, even though you know it's leading nowhere. When Rick speaks about the universe, there's always a flicker of bitterness in his tone. He calls it chaos, randomness, absurdity. But beneath those words lies grief. He's not angry at the universe for being meaningless. He's mourning the fact that he ever wanted it to mean something. That longing makes him human, no matter how many times he denies it. He mocks faith, love, morality, all the human constructs that give others comfort, because he once believed in them too, and when they fell apart, so did he. His mind outgrew hope, but his heart never caught up. The collapse of meaning leaves Rick in a constant state of contradiction. He knows that nothing matters, yet he still reacts when Morty is hurt. He knows time is irrelevant, yet he still fears aging. He knows identity is fluid, yet he still clings to the name Rick Sanchez. These contradictions are what keep him tethered to life. They prove that even in the absence of objective purpose, subjective meaning persists. He'd never admit it, but his actions betray him. The scientist who claims to believe in nothing keeps behaving like someone who does. That's the paradox at the core of Rick's existence. He's both the destroyer of meaning and the proof that it can't be destroyed. Every time he says nothing matters, he still chooses something to do afterward. Drink, build, travel, save. Each act, no matter how cynical, is a rebellion against the void. If he truly believed in nothing, he'd stop. But he doesn't. He keeps going. The question isn't whether Rick believes in meaning, but whether he can stand the vulnerability it demands. Because to assign meaning is to care, and to care is to risk pain. In the silence of his garage, surrounded by half-finished inventions, Rick often finds himself confronting that contradiction. The glow of alien tech reflects off his flask, and for a moment, the flask, hum of machinery, sounds almost like a heartbeat. He sits there, looking at the things he's built, devices that can alter time, bend space, resurrect the dead, and feels nothing. No pride, no awe, just fatigue. Creation should bring joy, but to Rick, it's routine. He's reached the point where even godhood feels monotonous. That's what happens when you've proven too much. Every revelation becomes another reminder that the mystery is gone. And yet, sometimes, in the middle of that emptiness, he laughs. A small, tired laugh that sounds almost like relief, because there's something liberating about knowing the universe doesn't care. It means he's free. Free from cosmic judgment, from destiny, from expectation. The freedom is unbearable, but it's still freedom. It's what allows him to live on his own terms, to reject systems of meaning imposed by others. He's seen gods and governments and galaxies rise and fall, and he knows they're all the same, temporary, illusions pretending to be eternal. That understanding isolates him, but it also protects him. It's the one truth he can rely on. Everything ends. The danger of that truth is how easily it turns to apathy. Rick teeters constantly between clarity and collapse. One moment he's laughing at the absurdity of it all. The next he's drowning in it. Meaninglessness becomes both his armor and his prison. It shields him from disappointment, but also robs him of joy. Every time he tries to connect with someone, the thought sneaks in, none of this will matter. The knowledge seeps into his relationships, corroding them from within. How do you love someone when you've seen infinite versions of them? How do you care when you know they've already died somewhere else? The multiverse doesn't just stretch space, it stretches meaning until it snaps. Rick's tragedy is that he understands the joke but can't laugh sincerely anymore. His humour is defensive, a way to control the absurdity rather than surrender to it. He uses irony like a weapon, cutting down sentiment before it can touch him. But sometimes irony fails. Sometimes, in the middle of chaos, a moment of sincerity slips through. A hug from Morty, a quiet dinner with Beth, a memory that doesn't need to be rewritten. Those are the moments that undo him, the ones that remind him that even in a meaningless universe, something can still feel right. Not true, not logical, just right. And that's enough to hurt. Rick's collapse of meaning is not permanent, it breathes. It shrinks and expands depending on how close he allows himself to get to others. When he isolates, meaning evaporates. When he connects, it flickers back to life, fragile but real. The scientist in him knows it's all chemical, serotonin, oxytocin, neural responses. But the part of him that still feels knows that doesn't make it less real. Meaning doesn't need to be eternal to be important. That's a truth he keeps rediscovering, one reluctant realization at a time. There's something quietly beautiful about how Rick carries his emptiness. He doesn't pretend to fill it, he just learns to move with it. He knows that purpose isn't something the universe gives, it's something you construct, patchwork style, from moments that matter to you. He'd never say it out loud, but he lives by it. Every act of creation, every reluctant gesture of kindness, every time he goes on another adventure, despite claiming to hate them, all of it is meaning, disguised as meaninglessness. Rick Sanchez may have killed God in his mind, but he still builds little worlds to worship in. That's the essence of his loneliness. He's too aware to believe, but too human to stop searching. Meaning collapses around him. But he keeps building scaffolds of connection anyway, as if daring the void to prove him wrong. Maybe that's what redemption looks like for him. Not a grand revelation or a moral awakening, but quiet persistence in the face of futility. He doesn't need the universe to have meaning anymore. He just needs a reason to keep going. And somehow, even after everything, he finds one. Rick Sanchez doesn't run from the universe. He runs from silence. The multiverse isn't his playground, it's his hiding place. Every portal he opens, every new world he enters, is another attempt to stay ahead of stillness. Stillness is dangerous because it doesn't lie. It holds up a mirror to the emptiness he tries to ignore. So he fills his life with noise, explosions, arguments, inventions, laughter, chaos, anything loud enough to drown out the hum of his own thoughts. The more unbearable life feels, the faster he moves. His escape isn't about curiosity anymore, it's about survival. Rick's constant movement gives the illusion of control. If he's always doing something, he doesn't have to feel anything. The garage becomes his sanctuary, not because it's home, but because it's busy. The clutter of machines, the smell of metal and alcohol, the static buzz of half-finished experiments, all of it is sound. All of it is proof that he's still in motion. Even his arguments with Morty serve a purpose. They remind him he exists. Conflict, chaos, destruction, they're not symptoms of insanity, they're rituals against silence. Because when the world gets quiet, he has to face what he's lost, and that's a battle he never wins. Rick's escapes are paradoxical. They're meant to free him, but they only deepen his isolation. Every time he disappears into another dimension, he leaves behind another version of himself, another set of connections severed mid-sentence. Each departure is supposed to erase his pain, but it multiplies it instead. He builds universes to escape loneliness, and ends up populating them with reflections of it. The multiverse becomes a hall of mirrors, and no matter which version he confronts, each one looks just as tired. His genius lets him escape everything except himself. The noise of escape comes in many forms. Sometimes it's scientific, an experiment that spirals into catastrophe, a breakthrough that only leads to another void. Sometimes it's emotional, a fight he starts just to feel alive, a cruel joke to push someone away before they get too close. And sometimes it's chemical, the flask in his hand, the drugs that blur the line between thought and oblivion. These aren't acts of self-destruction in the simple sense. They're attempts to create a version of reality he can stand. When the world becomes too sharp, he dulls it. When it becomes too quiet, he fills it with static. It's not addiction in the traditional sense. It's maintenance. For Rick, escape is an art form. He doesn't just flee. He rewrites the world to accommodate his retreat. His portal gun isn't a symbol of exploration. It's a monument to avoidance. Every glowing green circle is another promise he makes to himself. I can leave whenever I want. That freedom comforts him, even when he doesn't use it. The knowledge that escape is always possible becomes his anchor. He never has to face the permanence of consequence because there's always another world waiting. But the irony is cruel. Infinite escape erases the very thing he's running from. Meaning. Without consequence, there's no connection. Without connection, there's no reason to return. Sometimes, in rare moments, Rick lets the noise fade just long enough to realize what he's doing. He'll stand in his garage, tools motionless, a drink untouched. The silence presses against him like gravity. It's heavy, suffocating, filled with memories he never processed, faces he disappointed, words he never said, futures he abandoned. It's in those moments that the mask cracks, when he whispers something to no one, when his eyes flicker with a sadness too deep for words. Then, just as quickly, he shakes it off, flips a switch, ignites a portal, starts another project. Silence, once again, becomes motion. Rick's pattern of escape also reveals his dependence on chaos. He doesn't know how to live without crisis. Stability unnerves him because it forces reflection. A calm world feels foreign to him, too slow, too exposed. So he creates instability wherever he goes, as if discomfort is the only environment where he can breathe. It's a twisted form of equilibrium. His life only feels balanced when it's falling apart. To Rick, peace isn't peace. It's the waiting room before collapse. The noise keeps the collapse at bay. Morty often mistakes Rick's chaos for excitement, for the thrill of adventure. But beneath the surface, it's exhaustion. Every adventure begins with wonder and ends with withdrawal. Rick pretends it's about discovery, but it's really about distraction. He's chasing intensity because intensity keeps him numb. The louder the world gets, the quieter his mind becomes. It's not joy that drives him, it's avoidance disguised as purpose. He doesn't need to find new worlds, he needs to lose himself in them. His relationship with noise isn't just external, it's internal. His thoughts are a constant storm, fast, erratic, merciless. He overanalyzes every emotion until it collapses under logic. When he feels sadness, he calls it chemical imbalance. When he feels love, he calls it dependency. When he feels guilt, he calls it irrelevant. It's how he survives his own mind, by turning feelings into data. But even data has echoes, and those echoes haunt him in moments of quiet. That's why he can't stop moving. He's not just escaping the world, he's escaping the echo of himself. There's tragedy in the efficiency of his escapes. They work. He always finds a way out. But every time he leaves, he takes a little less of himself with him. The man who once sought truth now settles for distraction. The scientist who once questioned everything now avoids one question. Why does he keep running? Maybe it's because he knows the answer. Because deep down, Rick Sanchez isn't afraid of the universe being empty. He's afraid of proving that he's the one who made it that way. His noise, his chaos, his escapes, they're not evidence of a meaningless world. They're proof of a man trying not to face the meaning he destroyed. Still, there's something almost poetic about the way Rick keeps moving. For all the emptiness he feels, his escapes are still acts of creation. He builds, he explores, he experiments. Even his avoidance gives birth to new realities. There's a quiet hope in that maybe, through endless escape, he'll stumble into something that holds him long enough to make him stop. A world that isn't louder, but truer. He'll never say he wants that, but the way he hesitates before stepping through a portal, the way his eyes linger on the family he pretends not to care about, those are the moments that reveal his longing. He doesn't just want to escape, he wants to be found. That's the contradiction that defines Rick's loneliness. He runs from connection, yet leaves breadcrumbs. Behind, sarcasm, invention, chaos, all pointing back to himself. It's as if he's daring someone to follow him through the noise, to see through the destruction, to recognize that every explosion, every cruel word, is really a flare sent up from a man too proud to ask for rescue. The tragedy is that most never see it. They just see the mess, not the message. And so, Rick keeps running. Not because no one can reach him, but because no one ever tries long enough to. Maybe, in the end, escape isn't Rick's flaw. Maybe it's his form of prayer. The only way he knows how to speak to a universe that stopped answering him. Every time he opens a portal, he's asking the same question: is there somewhere I can rest? And even though the answer is always no, he keeps asking. Because to stop would mean accepting that there isn't. The noise, then, is not just avoidance, it's faith in motion. A restless belief that if he runs far enough, maybe silence will finally sound like peace. For Rick Sanchez, Morty isn't just a companion. He's a reflection, a living, breathing mirror that shows Rick what he used to be and what he'll never be again. Every time Rick looks at Morty, he sees the ghost of his own lost innocence flicker in the boy's eyes. That's why he pushes him so hard. It's not cruelty, it's desperation. Rick needs to know that Morty can survive the truth of the universe, that he won't break the way Rick did. But teaching someone to live without illusion means stealing the very thing that makes life worth living. It's the cruel paradox of Rick's mentorship. He's trying to save Morty from pain by forcing him to feel it. Rick doesn't see Morty as a sidekick. He sees him as an experiment. Not in a cold, clinical sense, but in a human one. He's testing whether empathy can coexist with awareness, whether a person can know how meaningless everything is and still care. It's a question Rick can't answer for himself, so he runs the simulation through Morty. Every adventure becomes another trial, another data point. And every time Morty comes back shaken, angry, or heartbroken, but still capable of love, Rick feels something he'll never admit: hope. The kind of hope that terrifies him because it suggests there might still be something left to believe in. The bond between them is built on contradiction. Morty needs Rick's genius to survive, and Rick needs Morty's innocence to remember why survival matters. They orbit each other, chaos and compassion locked in perpetual motion. Rick mocks Morty's morality, calls it naive, yet secretly relies on it to anchor himself. Morty scolds Rick for his apathy, yet depends on him to make sense of an impossible universe. It's not balance, it's codependence disguised as adventure. And somewhere in that dysfunction lies something that looks like love. Not the soft, spoken kind, but the kind that grows in the wreckage of understanding. When Rick drags Morty through horrors that no human mind should witness, it's not because he's careless, it's because he's trying to normalize despair. He wants Morty to learn what he already knows. that suffering is the baseline of existence, and the only way to endure it is to laugh. But what he doesn't realize is that Morty's laughter isn't like his. Rick laughs to numb, Morty laughs to recover. It's the difference between avoidance and resilience. And every time Morty bounces back, every time he chooses empathy over cynicism, Rick is confronted by the truth he's spent his life denying, that maybe knowledge doesn't have to kill meaning. Morty humanizes Rick in ways no one else can. Around him, the armor slips. The jokes soften. The insults hide concern. The silence between them carries warmth. Rick will never say it, but Morty's presence keeps him tethered to something real. Without him, the noise would consume him completely. That's why, despite his constant complaints, Rick never truly leaves. He can abandon planets, timelines, even entire families, but he always finds his way back to Morty. It's not sentimentality, it's survival. Morty is his last link to the possibility of connection, the only person who can stand beside him in the void without falling into it. Rick's relationship with Morty is also his greatest source of guilt. Every lesson he teaches comes with a cost. Every adventure leaves a scar. He knows he's shaping Morty into someone harder, someone less innocent, and it breaks him in ways he'll never show. Each time Morty loses a piece of his empathy, Rick sees another reflection of his own downfall. It's why he oscillates between cruelty and care, pushing Morty away one moment and protecting him the next. He's trying to control the damage he's causing, even though he knows it's impossible. The more Morty grows, the more Rick sees his own mistakes repeating in miniature. Morty's defiance only deepens Rick's attachment. When Morty challenges him, refuses to follow, or calls him out, Rick feels something unfamiliar, pride. Not because he's being questioned, but because it means Morty's becoming his own person. It's proof that the experiment works, that someone can stare into the abyss and still come back with a sense of self intact. But that pride is bittersweet. It reminds Rick of everything he lost when he stopped fighting the void. He built walls to protect himself, and Morty keeps finding cracks in them. That's why their arguments hurt more than any alien battle. They're not fights between a teacher and a student. They're confrontations between past and present. Rick pretends to be indifferent to Morty's moral outbursts, but deep down, they wound him. Every time Morty accuses him of not caring, of being a monster, it strikes a nerve Rick can't numb, because he knows that somewhere in the infinite, Morty is right. There are versions of Rick who stopped caring entirely, who let the void the win. He's seen them, and he fears becoming them. Morty's disappointment is a mirror reflecting the version of himself he refuses to acknowledge, the one who still wants to be good, even if he's forgotten how. There's a quiet tragedy in how Rick teaches Morty about the universe. He gives him infinite possibilities, but no foundation to stand on. He shows him everything, and believes that knowledge will set him free. But freedom without meaning is just another kind of prison. Morty learns that lesson the hard way, and Rick watches it happen with a mix of pride and despair. It's the same path he walked, just slower, more human. And every time Morty chooses compassion over detachment, Rick feels something loosen in his chest, the faintest release from a burden he thought was permanent. Their connection is the only relationship in Rick's life that evolves. Everyone else stays caught in the loops of his self-destruction, but Morty changes, he grows, and Rick, despite himself, changes with him. It's subtle, almost imperceptible, but it's there, a hesitation before a cruel word, a rare moment of gratitude, a softer goodbye. Morty's presence creates ripples in Rick's static world. He doesn't cure the loneliness, but he interrupts it. That interruption is enough to keep Rick alive. The mirror Morty holds up is merciless. It reflects not only who Rick is, but who he could be. Every time Morty forgives him, Rick sees proof that forgiveness is still possible. Every time Morty smiles after a tragedy, Rick sees resilience he no longer believes he has. It's unbearable and miraculous at once. Because in a universe that recycles everything, life, death, timelines, souls, Morty represents something rare, renewal. Through him, Rick glimpses the version of existence that doesn't end in cynicism, the version that finds meaning, not in logic, but in love. But love, for Rick, is always painful. The more he cares about Morty, the more he fears losing him. He's seen infinite Mortys die, betray him, disappear. The multiverse has turned affection into a statistical risk, and yet he keeps choosing it. That's the quiet heroism of Rick Sanchez, a man who believes in nothing but keeps loving anyway. Not perfectly, not kindly, but persistently. Because somewhere deep inside, he understands that the only antidote to infinity is attachment, however fragile. Rick's loneliness doesn't vanish in Morty's presence, but it changes shape. It becomes quieter, softer, less cruel. It stops being a void and becomes a distance, something bridgeable, if only for a while. And in that distance, there's a strange kind of peace. Rick will never be whole, never be healed, but when Morty laughs beside him after another impossible day, the emptiness doesn't feel infinite, it feels human. Rick Sanchez is haunted not by what he's done, but by what he remembers. His mind, sharp enough to bend reality, is also cursed with perfect recall. Every failure, every loss, every cruel word he wishes he hadn't said, they linger like ghosts in the circuitry of his consciousness. Most people forget to survive, but Rick can't. He remembers too clearly, too completely. His intelligence traps him in his own past. Memory, for Rick, is not a record, it's a cage. He's built machines to erase memories, to fragment them, to store them away in neat, numbered jars. But the truth is that the memories never really leave. They float somewhere in the periphery, just outside of language, waiting for the quiet moments to return. And when they do, they hit harder than any weapon. It's not the failures that break him. It's the things that once made him happy. A sound, a face, a flash of laughter that lasted too long to be meaningless. Those are the ones that undo him. Because they remind him that once, before the universe expanded too far, he believed. Rick's memory is a paradox. It gives him power, but it also denies him peace. The reason he can invent anything is because he never truly lets go of anything. Every idea, every formula, every mistake compounds inside him until the weight becomes unbearable. That's why he drinks. Not to forget in the simple sense, but to blur the edges of remembering. The alcohol dulls the images just enough so they stop replaying in vivid colour. But when it wears off, they return sharper than before. It's a cycle he knows he can't escape, but one he can't stop repeating. In his mind, the past doesn't exist linearly. It collapses in on itself. Joy and grief, love and regret, coexist like overlapping frequencies. He remembers the birth of Beth and the moment he left her in the same heartbeat. He remembers laughter with friends and the silence that followed their absence. His brain is a hall of doors, each leading to another version of the same pain. He tries to lock them, but the locks never hold. Time, for Rick, isn't progression, it's recurrence. That's what makes his intelligence so tragic. He can calculate the lifespan of a star, but not the half-life of a memory. He can isolate any element in the known universe except his own guilt. So he does what he always does. He tries to outthink it. He analyzes his past the way he dissects matter, searching for a formula that will make it make sense. But emotion resists logic. There's no equation for loss. And the more he tries to understand it, the more it expands, swallowing even his curiosity. Rick's relationship with memory is also a form of punishment. He refuses to forget because forgetting would feel like betrayal. He clings to the pain because it proves he once had something to lose. The wound becomes his shrine. Every moment of sorrow becomes sacred, preserved beneath layers of cynicism. When people accuse him of being heartless, they don't see that he's protecting a heart too full to function. Memory, for Rick, is proof of love, distorted, painful, but proof nonetheless. Sometimes, when he's alone, he revisits certain memories deliberately. He'll replay a moment with Beth, a quiet evening in the garage, a joke that made her laugh before she understood the world the way he does now. He doesn't smile when he remembers. He studies it, as if looking for the flaw in the equation that caused everything to fall apart. But deep down, he knows there isn't one. The collapse was inevitable, and he's been living in the aftermath ever since. The cruelest part of memory is how it keeps him connected to versions of himself he can't stand. Every decision he regrets is still alive, somewhere in his mind, whispering. Every universe where he made a different choice exists not just in theory, but in his imagination. That's the real multiverse, the one inside his skull. Infinite Ricks, each carrying the same regrets, each pretending their choices mattered. He can't escape them because they are him. And the more he remembers, the less he knows which version of himself is real. Memory blurs the boundary between identity and illusion. Rick's recollections are too detailed, too pristine. He can't tell whether he's remembering something that actually happened or something he imagined out of guilt. His mind has rewritten so many timelines, resurrected so many moments, that even his own life feels like a construct. That uncertainty eats at him. If memory defines who you are, what happens when your memories are lies? When the line between fact and fantasy dissolves, what's left to call the self? Sometimes he wonders if forgetting would be mercy. Not the mechanical kind, not erasing data from his brain, but true forgetting, the kind that time grants naturally to those who can still sleep without dreaming. But he knows he'll never have that luxury. His mind is too awake, too sharp. Even when he sleeps, it keeps working, reassembling memories in new, painful combinations. Rest, for Rick Sanchez, is just another state of analysis. His loneliness and his memory feed each other. The more he remembers, the less he can connect. Every new bond feels fragile compared to what he's already lost. Every moment of joy carries the weight of future grief. That's why he distances himself from people. Not because he doesn't care, but because he already knows how the story ends. Memory turns every present into a preview of its own ending. And for someone who's already seen the ending too many times, it's easier not to begin. But memory also saves him in its own cruel way. It keeps him tethered to meaning, even when he denies it. No matter how far he runs, how many universes he abandons, there are certain moments he can't delete. Morty's loyalty, Beth's laughter, a family dinner that somehow wasn't a disaster. Those memories refuse to fade, and because of that, Rick can't completely surrender to nihilism. They're the fragments that survive every apocalypse, every relapse, every dimension. They're proof that even a man who claims to care about nothing has been touched by everything. Sometimes, in rare moments of clarity, Rick realizes that memory isn't the enemy. It's the echo of living. Painful, unrelenting, but necessary. Because without memory, there would be no remorse, no compassion, no recognition of others. His suffering is proof that he still belongs to the human story, however reluctantly. And in that realization, there's a hint of peace, not enough to heal him, but enough to let him breathe. He'll never escape his memories. They're the shadow of his brilliance, the price of his awareness. But maybe that's the point. Maybe the reason he remembers so vividly is because some part of him refuses to let the good die completely. Maybe the cage is also the monument. In the end, Rick Sanchez lives surrounded by ghosts of his own making, but those ghosts, as cruel as they are, keep him from disappearing altogether. Memory may torment him, but it also keeps him real. Control is Rick Sanchez's religion. It's the illusion he worships to keep from falling apart. Every invention, every calculated risk, every universe-altering decision is a way of saying, I decide. In a cosmos governed by chaos, Rick refuses to surrender to randomness. But that refusal has become its own kind of prison. Because control, for Rick, is never satisfaction, it's maintenance. He doesn't build to dominate the world, he builds to stop it from breaking him. And every time he thinks he's mastered it, it slips away, leaving him more hollow than before. To most people, control looks like strength, but in Rick's hands, it's desperation disguised as brilliance. He's constantly rewriting equations, altering timelines, bending physics, not because he needs to, but because he can't stand the idea that anything could exist beyond his reach. His genius has turned into a compulsive need to organize the unorganizable. Every act of creation doubles as a denial of uncertainty. He claims he doesn't believe in fate, but the truth is more painful. He doesn't believe in surrender. To let go would mean trusting something outside himself, and that's a leap he's no longer capable of making. Control is the language Rick uses to argue with God, or with the idea of one. It's his rebellion against powerlessness. Somewhere deep in his past, there must have been a moment when the world betrayed him, when randomness took something he loved and refused to explain why. That moment fractured him. Since then, he's been trying to fix a wound that doesn't heal. His inventions are prosthetics for helplessness. They don't restore him, they replace him. And the more he replaces, the less of him remains. The irony is that Rick's control never stabilizes anything. It breeds instability. Every time he intervenes, the system collapses in a new way. Every fix becomes another failure waiting to happen. But he keeps doing it because the alternative, accepting impermanence, terrifies him more than destruction. He'd rather destroy the universe than admit he can't save it. That's why his genius feels tragic instead of triumphant. It's brilliance without peace, mastery without mercy. Rick's control issues extend far beyond science. They infect his relationships. He treats love like a variable he can manipulate. He designs emotional systems the same way he designs machines, predictable inputs, expected outputs. But people don't work that way. They resist programming. Morty disobeys. Beth questions, Summer argues. And every act of free will scratches at Rick's illusion of control. He can build infinite worlds, but he can't make anyone stay. That's the one equation he can't solve, and it infuriates him. Because deep down, what he wants isn't obedience, it's assurance. He wants to believe that if he's smart enough, no one he loves will ever leave again. The fragility of Rick's control is what makes him human. He knows it's unsustainable, yet he clings to it. He mocks others for believing in hope, but control is his version of it. It's how he prays, through precision, through invention, through the quiet hum of machines he understands, when he can't understand himself. There's a heartbreaking purity in that. His control isn't arrogance, it's faith in a form the universe can't break. Every switch he flips, every machine he powers on, is an act of resistance against chaos, even when he knows it's futile. But control has a cost. It isolates him from vulnerability, and without vulnerability, connection dies. He builds safety by removing unpredictability, but unpredictability is where life happens. Every time he tightens his grip, he loses a little more of what he's trying to protect. It's why his victories feel hollow, why even triumph tastes bitter. Control ensures survival, but it kills spontaneity. And spontaneity is where joy lives. Rick knows this. He's smart, enough to understand it, but knowledge doesn't equal ability. He can describe the mechanism of emotion without ever feeling it fully. Sometimes, control slips without warning. A plan fails, a portal misfires, a life ends too soon, and suddenly the universe reminds him that he's not its author. Those are the moments that break him. He doesn't rage, he collapses inward, because every failure isn't just technical, it's existential. It confirms the thing he fears most, that intelligence is not immunity, that awareness doesn't grant authority. For someone like Rick, that realization isn't humbling, it's humiliating. To lose control means to admit that the world never needed him to begin with. There are times when he almost accepts it, when he sits quietly after the chaos, watching the smoke settle, and feels something close to surrender. It's not peace, but exhaustion disguised as it. He'll stare at the stars, the same ones he's travelled through countless times, and realize how indifferent they are. And in that indifference, he finds a strange comfort. If the universe doesn't care, then maybe he can stop pretending to. But that thought never lasts. Within minutes, he's back at his bench, tightening bolts, adjusting circuits, trying again. Control isn't something he practices, it's something that practices him. Morty sometimes sees through it. He catches the moments when Rick's hands tremble, when his eyes glaze not with arrogance but with fatigue. He doesn't call it out, he just stays nearby. And in that silent companionship, Rick's illusion holds a little longer. Control feels easier when someone believes it's real. Maybe that's why Rick keeps Morty close, not just for adventure, but for validation. Morty's faith in him is the one variable he can still manipulate, and the one that keeps him from collapsing. The fragility of Rick's control mirrors the fragility of his existence. The tighter he holds onto certainty, the more uncertain he becomes. He's built his entire identity around being unbreakable, yet everything about him cracks under its own weight. His genius, his authority, his detachment, all of it is scaffolding around a structure that's always on the verge of collapse. The miracle is that it hasn't fallen yet. Maybe that's because, somewhere inside, Rick doesn't want total control. He wants to keep chasing it because chasing gives him purpose. The illusion is the point. In rare moments, Rick lets go, if only for an instant. Not because he wants to, but because he can't help it. A burst of laughter with his family, a simple meal, a shared silence. These are the cracks in the armor where light gets in. For a fleeting second, he stops managing everything and simply exists. Those moments terrify him because they remind him what he's missing. They show him that peace isn't found in control, but in trust. And trust is something he's forgotten how to build. Rick's tragedy is that he could have been free. He could have accepted uncertainty, embraced imperfection, allowed the world to surprise him. But freedom without control feels like chaos, and chaos is the wound he's been trying to heal since the beginning. So he keeps building, keeps fixing, keeps pretending. He calls it science, but it's really prayer, the ritual of a man trying to create stability in a universe that laughs at the idea of it. And yet, for all its futility, there's beauty in it. Because control, for Rick, is also creation. It's how he expresses care in a world he doesn't trust. Every gadget, every invention, every improbable rescue, they're not just acts of intellect, they're acts of love disguised as precision. He can't say, "I need you," but he can build a machine that proves it. He can't say, "I'm sorry," but he can rewrite the laws of physics to make it less painful. Maybe control isn't the opposite of love for Rick. Maybe it's how he loves. That's the secret at the center of his loneliness. The man who can control everything can't control his own need for connection. No matter how much he tightens his grip, people slip through. And he knows they will. He's too smart not to. But he keeps reaching anyway, keeps building, keeps fighting entropy, one invention at a time. Because somewhere deep down, Rick Sanchez still hopes that one day control and peace might coexist, that he might finally fix something without breaking himself in the process. Freedom is Rick Sanchez's favorite lie. He says it constantly, that he's free, that no one controls him, that the universe bends to his will. He sneers at rules, laughs at governments, mocks the concept of destiny. But beneath all that defiance, there's a quiet truth he'll never admit. Rick isn't free at all. He's trapped inside the illusion of freedom, chained to the very rebellion he worships. Every act of defiance is another repetition of the same pattern, proving he can't be contained. But proof isn't freedom, it's dependence in disguise. Rick doesn't reject control, he needs it to define himself. His freedom is performative. It's not about choice, but about opposition. He doesn't choose where to go, he chooses where not to stay. His life is a constant escape from responsibility, intimacy, consequence, anything that implies belonging. To Rick, freedom means absence. Absence of attachment, absence of structure, absence of pain. But emptiness mistaken for freedom eventually feels like suffocation. He moves from world to world, from body to body, from idea to idea, not because he wants to explore, but because staying still means feeling the weight of his own captivity. Rick's universe is infinite, yet he lives in a cage made of his own avoidance. Every time he opens a portal, he's reinforcing its walls. Infinite options don't create freedom, they dilute it. When everything is possible, nothing has value. He knows that better than anyone, and it tortures him. He's seen universes where he's happy, universes where he's dead, universes where he never existed at all. The knowledge should liberate him, but it doesn't. It proves that his choices don't matter. And when choices don't matter, neither does freedom. It becomes theatre, a performance he repeats to distract himself from the fact that he has no script left to write. Rick's illusion of freedom also manifests in his relationships. He claims he doesn't need anyone, but he orbits people like a planet tethered by invisible gravity. He drifts away and comes back again and again, insisting it's his choice. But true freedom wouldn't require explanation. It wouldn't demand rebellion as proof. Rick's independence is reactive. He defines it by what he resists. The moment someone gets close enough to care, he runs. Not because he wants distance, but because he needs to feel like leaving is still an option. It's how he measures control in a universe that keeps reminding him he has none. He romanticizes freedom the same way others romanticize love. It's his unreachable ideal, the thing he chases because catching it would ruin the chase. Freedom gives him a sense of purpose, even when it's empty. It's the mirage that keeps him moving. But deep down, Rick knows that total freedom doesn't exist. Every action has consequence. Every creation has echo. Every bond leaves a mark. He's not escaping systems. He's building new ones. wherever he goes. The garage is his throne room, but it's also his prison cell, a space entirely under his control, yet surrounded by walls of his own making. The illusion of freedom comforts him because it offers a simple lie, that the pain of being alive is optional, that if he just keeps running, he can find a world where existence feels clean again. But the truth keeps catching up. Every world he visits is just another reflection of himself, and he's the one thing he can't escape. Freedom means nothing when your own mind is the warden. His intelligence amplifies the cage, turning awareness into confinement. He can travel anywhere, but he carries himself everywhere. Sometimes, Rick tests the boundaries of his own illusion. He'll let himself feel something, care, guilt, longing, just long enough to see how much it hurts. Then he buries it beneath a joke, a drink, a distraction. The cycle repeats. Each moment of honesty threatens the illusion, and each retreat reinforces it. Freedom, for Rick, has become an elaborate balancing act. Too much awareness, and he collapses into despair. Too little, and he becomes mechanical. So he hovers in between, in that liminal state where he's free enough to run, but never free enough to stop. Morty sees through it sometimes. He notices the way Rick hesitates before leaving, the way he lingers after saying he's done with the family, the way his eyes soften when no one's looking. Morty doesn't call him out for it. He knows that naming the illusion makes it crumble, and Rick isn't ready for that, so Morty lets him keep pretending. That unspoken understanding between them, that silent permission to keep lying, is what keeps Rick functioning. The illusion needs believers, and Morty, knowingly or not, plays that role. Freedom, in its purest form, is about acceptance, the ability to exist without needing to escape. But Rick's freedom is rejection. He defines it by destruction of systems, of expectations of himself. Every time he rebels, he's reaffirming the rules he claims to despise. The universe doesn't need to imprison him. His defiance does that for it. The irony is that the man who dismantled God replaced him with the only authority crueler, his own logic. In Rick's world, emotion is weakness, trust is risk, surrender is death. Those rules keep him alive, but they also keep him lonely. There are brief moments when his illusion fractures, when he's too tired to argue, too hurt to joke, too honest to hide. In those moments, Rick glimpses what real freedom might feel like. It's not power, it's stillness. It's the ability to stop running without the universe collapsing around him. It's sitting beside Morty, not because he has to teach him something, but because he wants to. It's telling Beth he's proud of her without turning it into sarcasm. It's falling asleep sober and waking up without regret. He tastes it, and it terrifies him because it's too fragile, too sincere. Freedom that's soft doesn't survive in his world, so he pushes it away before it can break. Rick's illusion of freedom is also tied to his fear of fate. The idea that something, anything, might be guiding him infuriates him. He's seen how people use destiny to justify suffering, and he refuses to play along. But his rebellion has become its own form of destiny. Every decision he makes is a reaction to the same wound, the need to prove he's untouchable. That need shapes him more than any god ever could. It's his mythology, his curse. In a way, Rick's illusion of freedom keeps him alive. It gives him something to fight for, even if that fight is endless. The rebellion is the rhythm of his existence, the heartbeat beneath the chaos. It may not be peace, but it's motion. And in motion, he finds meaning, however temporary. Because even if he knows the freedom isn't real, pretending it is feels better than facing the silence of surrender. Maybe that's what freedom really is for him. Not release, but defiance. Not the absence of chains, but the refusal to stop pulling against them. Rick's tragedy is that he's too aware to believe in real freedom, but too stubborn to live without it. So he keeps running, keeps laughing, keeps fighting gravity. And maybe that's enough. Because for someone who's seen the infinite, even the illusion of freedom is a reason to keep breathing. Guilt, for Rick Sanchez, is not a passing emotion. It's a force of nature. It drags at him constantly, invisible but absolute, shaping the trajectory of his every action. He doesn't show it, not in the way most people do. There are no apologies, no tears, no open confessions. His guilt hides beneath laughter, under sarcasm, inside the clink of a flask. It's not the guilt of someone who's done wrong and wants forgiveness. It's the guilt of someone who knows there is no forgiveness left to earn. Rick doesn't feel sorry because he thinks he could have done better. He feels sorry because he knows he couldn't. He carries guilt the way others carry memory, always present, impossible to set down. Every relationship he's ruined, every life he's altered, every world he's broken, they linger like ghosts at the edge of his awareness. He doesn't need reminders. His mind supplies them on loop. When he laughs too hard, they whisper. When he drinks too deep, they rise to the surface. He can't outthink them, can't outdrink them. Genius is no defense against regret. It only makes it sharper. The smarter you are, the more angles you can see your mistakes from. Rick's guilt isn't clean or simple. It's layered, recursive, tangled with pride. Part of him believes he deserves to feel this way. Another part believes the universe deserved what it got. Those contradictions don't cancel each other out. They coexist, feeding off one another. Guilt and arrogance make a perfect pair, one convincing him he's responsible for everything, the other convincing him he's right to be. That tension keeps him alive, but it also keeps him suffering. To Rick, guilt is both punishment and purpose. If he ever forgave himself, he'd lose the last thread tying him to meaning. Most of Rick's cruelty comes from guilt, not malice. The more he cares about someone, the more dangerous he becomes to them. Because love triggers the memory of everyone he's already lost, and guilt turns that love into fear. He pushes people away, not to hurt them, but to protect them from the gravitational field of his own collapse. He knows what happens to those who orbit him. They burn, they drift, they die. And yet, he keeps pulling them close, because the silence without them is worse. That's the tragedy of his guilt. It isolates him and binds him at the same time. He's haunted most by the things he didn't destroy on purpose. The collateral damage. The people who trusted him to fix something and paid for it instead. He doesn't talk about them, but you can feel their weight in the pauses between his jokes. Every sarcastic quip is a small rebellion against the ghosts. He mocks the universe because he can't apologize to it. He keeps moving because if he ever stops, they'll catch up. Guilt doesn't chase him loudly. It waits. It knows he'll come back eventually. He always does. In the rare moments when Rick lets the guilt surface, it comes out sideways. A cruel comment that sounds like honesty. A confession disguised as a joke. A flash of anger that has nothing to do with the situation at hand. He lashes out not because he wants to hurt, but because he's trying to provoke reality into punishing him. It never does. The universe doesn't care. That's the problem. There's no one to hold him accountable but himself. And he's too clever to believe punishment means anything. So instead, he turns it inward, slowly, consistently, until guilt becomes his atmosphere. Rick's guilt also manifests in his obsession with fixing things. Every machine, every plan, every impossible rescue is a penance. He can't undo the past, so he tries to outbuild it. But guilt isn't linear. It doesn't have a resolution. You can't engineer redemption. Every solution just reveals another flaw. He tries anyway, because not trying would mean admitting defeat. And Rick Sanchez doesn't believe in defeat, only delay. His guilt fuels his. His genius amplifies his guilt. It's a closed system, infinite and exhausting. Beth embodies the core of his guilt more than anyone else. She's proof that his choices had consequences beyond himself. Every look she gives him, every word they exchange, carries the tension of unfinished business. He wants to make it right, but right doesn't exist anymore. She grew up in the shadow of his absence, and no invention can erase that. He can clone her, replace her, even rewrite her timeline, but he can't give her back the father she needed. That's the cruelty of guilt. It knows when it's too late, and doesn't care. It keeps bleeding, long after the wound has scarred. Morty triggers a different kind of guilt, one mixed with hope. Rick sees how much of himself lives in Morty, and it terrifies him. Every risk he takes, every lecture he gives, is laced with the fear that he's recreating the same tragedy. He tells himself he's preparing Morty for the truth, but part of him knows he's just sharing the infection, teaching him to see too much, to feel too little. It's not mentorship, it's inheritance. And every time Morty forgives him, every time he laughs again after being broken, Rick feels the guilt deepen. Forgiveness doesn't absolve him, it reminds him he didn't deserve it. The multiverse amplifies guilt beyond comprehension. Somewhere, in every direction, there's a version of Rick who made a different choice. A version who stayed. A version who didn't drink. A version who died instead of surviving. Knowing that doesn't relieve him, it condemns him further, because it proves that redemption exists, just not for him. He's aware of infinite possibilities, but he's trapped in this one. The one where he lived long enough to regret everything. Sometimes, in the middle of a quiet night, he'll let the guilt swallow him completely. No portals, no noise, no pretense. Just the hum of the lab and the slow ache of memory. He'll think about the lives he's erased, the faces he can't recall, the laughter he turned into silence. And for a brief moment, he'll feel something dangerously close to remorse. But remorse requires belief in change, and Rick doesn't have that anymore. So he takes a drink, mutters something to the void, and tells himself it's just another chemical imbalance. The truth is simpler. He feels too much and doesn't know how to stop. Guilt, in the end, is what keeps Rick tethered to humanity. It's the one emotion he can't intellectualize away. It outsmarts him, outlasts him, humbles him. It's what prevents him from becoming the complete monster he pretends to be. Because guilt implies conscience, and conscience implies care. If he truly didn't care, he wouldn't suffer. The pain proves he still belongs somewhere, even if he refuses to admit it. Maybe guilt is his way of staying alive, a constant reminder that he hasn't gone fully cold yet. That's the strange grace of Rick Sanchez. He'll never be forgiven, not by the universe, not by his family, not by himself. But as long as he feels guilt, he's still in the fight. He hasn't shut down completely. He hasn't become numb enough to stop hurting. And maybe that's what redemption looks like for him. Not absolution, but endurance. Carrying the weight, day after day, and still showing up, still building, still saving the people he swears he doesn't care about. His guilt doesn't make him good, but it keeps him human. And for someone like Rick, that might be enough. There are moments when Rick Sanchez stops speaking. When the jokes dry up, the sarcasm collapses, and even the flask sits untouched. In those rare moments, his silence is louder than any of his rants. Because what he's confronting in those pauses isn't loneliness or guilt or even love, it's existence itself, the sheer fact of being. For someone like Rick, existence is not a given, it's a burden. He doesn't take life for granted because he understands it too well. Every cell, every atom, every law of physics that makes it possible, he's dissected them all. He's seen how fragile it is, how absurdly random it all becomes when stripped of meaning. Awareness doesn't comfort him, it crushes him. Rick's existence is defined by contradiction. He's the most powerful man in the universe, yet completely powerless against the fact that he exists. He can move through time, alter reality, rewrite death itself, but he can't undo the truth that he is conscious, that he's forced to observe the universe without ever fully belonging to it. The more he understands, the heavier that awareness becomes. Knowledge, for Rick, isn't light, it's gravity. It pulls everything inward, tighter, denser, until his mind threatens to collapse under its own mass. He hides it well. To others, he looks unstoppable, the brilliant madman who always has another plan, another gadget, another way out. But those plans are less about victory and more about distraction. Because if he ever stopped building, if he ever stopped fixing, he'd have to sit in the full weight of being alive, and that's a confrontation he can't bear. It's not death he fears, it's the persistence of consciousness, the unending awareness of self, the inability to escape himself, no matter how many worlds he escapes to. Rick's tragedy is that he knows existence is meaningless, but he still feels its weight as though it weren't. He's too intelligent to believe in fate, and too human stop searching for it. He can describe the molecular structure of a soul and still ache for one. That's what makes his suffering unique. Most people suffer because they don't understand. Rick suffers because he understands too much. He's seen the architecture of existence, the machinery behind reality, and realized there's no operator. The universe runs on autopilot, indifferent and infinite. For most, that realization would destroy faith. For Rick, it destroyed belonging. The weight of existence doesn't just manifest in thought, it seeps into his body. The exhaustion, the drinking, the slouched posture, the sighs that last too long. His body carries the proof of awareness, like an old machine, straining under a cosmic load. He's not tired from running, he's tired from continuing. Every day, he wakes up, looks at a world he's already decoded, and has to convince himself to participate again. Every day, he chooses motion over meaning, because meaning has failed him too, many times. His survival isn't perseverance, it's momentum. He jokes about suicide often, not to be edgy, but to test the line between existence and oblivion. He knows death won't solve anything. It's just another variable, another form of continuation. He's seen too many versions of himself die to believe it ends. If existence persists beyond the body, then there's no escape, not even in death. That thought terrifies him more than mortality, because it means the consciousness that haunts him now could last forever. The mind that mocks the universe could outlive it. There's a quiet rebellion in how Rick carries the weight. He refuses to let it crush him completely. He mocks it, taunts it, plays with it. Every absurd adventure, every reckless experiment is his way of saying, if I have to exist, I'll do it on my own terms. He turns the weight into performance, but even defiance gets heavy when it lasts too long. And sometimes, when he's alone, the act falters. He looks out into the void, the stars he's visited, the dimensions he's conquered, and realizes how small his defiance really is. Against infinity, even rebellion becomes routine. The weight grows heavier when he remembers that he's not alone in it. He sees how Morty struggles to carry the awareness he's given him. He watches Beth wrestle with her reflection in him. He understands that his existence doesn't just burden himself, It burdens everyone who loves him. He's the gravitational center of his family's dysfunction, the mass that distorts every orbit. He knows it, and yet he stays. Not because he's selfish, but because leaving would make the weight even heavier. Responsibility, even when twisted, is still a form of love. Sometimes Rick tries to lighten the load for others. He'll pretend he's fine, pretend the universe doesn't matter, pretend nothing hurts. He wears cynicism like armor to keep others from feeling what he does. He thinks he's sparing them, but in truth, he's denying them connection. Because the only way to carry the weight of existence is together, and Rick refuses to let anyone help him lift it. His pride won't allow it. His loneliness depends on it, so he carries it alone, half as an act of martyrdom, half as a reflex he can't unlearn. The weight of existence also explains his fascination with chaos. In chaos, he finds temporary relief. Uncertainty feels lighter than meaninglessness. Randomness gives him something to fight against, a form to his frustration. That's why he keeps breaking the rules of the universe. It gives him something solid to push back on. Every time he defies a natural law, he reasserts himself as a force that still matters. The universe doesn't care, but that's the point. The fight itself becomes the meaning. There's beauty in the way Rick endures his awareness. He doesn't hide from truth, no matter how painful. He stares at it until it stops blinking. He looks at the absurdity of everything: death, time, love, consciousness, and still chooses to live. Not happily, not gracefully, but stubbornly. Existence hurts, but Rick refuses to let that be the end of the story. He turns pain into motion, emptiness into invention. His survival isn't denial, it's defiance. The weight of existence doesn't crush him because he never stops moving beneath it. In a quieter universe, one without portals and paradoxes, Rick might have been a poet. He might have written instead of built, reflected instead of escaped. But the tools he has are the only language he knows. Science is how he talks to the void. It's how he turns the weight into shape. Every device he builds is a sentence in his ongoing dialogue with existence, an argument he knows he'll never win, but refuses to stop having. And yet, for all his despair, Rick never gives up entirely. That's the proof that something inside him still believes in worth. If existence were truly meaningless to him, he'd stop fighting it. But he doesn't. He rages, he jokes, he sabotages himself, but he never fully quits. Maybe that's his version of faith, not belief in purpose, but persistence despite the lack of it. Existence weighs on him like a constant ache, but as long as he keeps carrying it, he's alive. There's a scene that plays in the quiet of his mind, one that doesn't belong to any timeline. He's standing alone, watching a sunrise on a planet no one remembers, and for a brief moment, the weight doesn't feel heavy. It just feels true. He realizes that existence doesn't need meaning to be beautiful, that awareness itself, painful and raw, is the closest thing to truth there is. He doesn't smile. He just exhales. Because for once, the burden doesn't feel like punishment. It feels like proof. For Rick Sanchez, connection is the most complicated paradox of all. He craves it and fears it in equal measure. He needs people close enough to quiet the static of his mind, but not so close that they can touch the part of him he keeps buried. Connection is dangerous because it implies permanence, and permanence is the one lie he can't afford to believe in. So he practices a kind of emotional physics. He lets people orbit him, never collide. They circle his life in repeating patterns of affection and frustration. And he calls that balance. But it isn't balance. It's survival disguised as distance. Connection makes Rick feel vulnerable in ways he doesn't have words for. Every act of care, every moment of warmth, opens a door in him that he's spent decades sealing shut. When Beth looks at him with love, he feels the gravity of responsibility. When Morty looks at him with trust, he feels the inevitability of failure. When someone laughs at his jokes, genuinely laughs, he feels the memory of the first time he made someone happy and how quickly it ended. To connect means to remember, and for Rick, memory is the language of loss. He's terrified of how quickly love can turn into a wound, so he keeps it at arm's length, even as he hungers for it. Rick doesn't believe in unconditional love. He's too analytical to accept anything that doesn't come with terms and exceptions. In his mind, love is a transaction, two people giving each other something until one runs out. He's been on both sides of that equation, and he doesn't trust it anymore. Every time someone says they love him, he hears a countdown ticking. He believes affection has an expiration date, and he'd rather be the one to end it than wait for it to end on its own. That's why he sabotages intimacy before it can grow roots. Leaving early hurts less than being left late. And yet, despite all the destruction, connection keeps finding him. No matter how many bridges he burns, someone always rebuilds one. Morty, Beth, Summer, sometimes even strangers, they all reach out, hoping to touch the version of him that still cares. And the cruel truth is, that version never went away. It's buried, yes, but it's alive. Every sarcastic dismissal, every cruel joke, every half-hearted apology, they're symptoms of a man who still feels too much. He tells himself he's incapable of love, but his actions betray him. He saves lives he claims don't matter. He protects people he says he doesn't need. He stays, even when leaving would be easier. That's not detachment. That's devotion, disguised as exhaustion. Rick's greatest fear isn't rejection, it's acceptance. Because acceptance would require him to stop hiding. It would mean letting someone see him not as a genius or a failure, but as a person. That level of vulnerability feels unbearable. He's built a mythology around himself to avoid it. The smartest man in the universe, the untouchable cynic, the eternal wanderer. Connection threatens that myth. If someone truly understood him, the story would fall apart. He'd have to admit that all the chaos, all the bravado, all the noise was just a way of saying, please don't leave. He's aware of it too. Rick isn't blind to his own contradictions. When Morty tells him he's selfish, he doesn't argue because he knows it's true. When Beth tells him he's broken, he doesn't deny it because he knows she's speaking from the same wound. But awareness doesn't equal change. Rick has spent so long defining himself through disconnection that he doesn't know who he'd be without it. He confuses independence with isolation, autonomy with absence. The idea of relying on someone feels like regression, like undoing all the armor he built to survive. But the armor has become too heavy to wear, and he knows it. There are small moments when connection slips through his defenses. A glance, a laugh, a quiet night where no one asks for explanations. In those moments, Rick doesn't feel better. He feels exposed. Joy makes him nervous. Peace makes him suspicious. When things are too calm, he waits for the fall. It's not paranoia, it's pattern recognition. His life has trained him to associate connection with loss, warmth with collapse. So when people show him love, he starts preparing for the grief that will follow. It's not cruelty, it's anticipation. Morty's presence complicates everything. He's the closest thing Rick has to unconditional love, and that terrifies him. Morty sees the worst in him and stays anyway. That kind of forgiveness is unbearable. It traps Rick in an emotional feedback loop The more Morty loves him, the more he feels undeserving. The more undeserving he feels, the more he pushes Morty away. It's a cycle that neither of them fully understands, but both instinctively repeat. And in that repetition lies their tragedy. Two people trying to save each other from the same pain. Rick's connection to Beth is quieter but deeper. It's rooted in guilt, but it's also the last remnant of hope he hasn't extinguished. When she looks at him, she doesn't see the legend or the lunatic. She sees the father she keeps trying to forgive. And every time she tries, it hurts him more. Because love from Beth means being seen as human, and being seen as human means admitting that the myth of Rick Sanchez was never about brilliance. It was about fear. The ache of connection isn't just emotional for Rick, it's existential. It's proof that no amount of intelligence can outgrow the need for others. He's tried to evolve past it, to convince himself that dependence is primitive. But evolution didn't erase empathy. Even the smartest man in the universe can't escape the biology of belonging. Every time he reaches out, even subconsciously, he's proving that connection is not weakness, it's inevitability. He's too human to unlearn it, no matter how hard he tries. And yet, connection remains his greatest unsolved equation. Every time he thinks he's balanced it, it shifts. Every time he opens up, something breaks. But maybe the problem isn't the instability. Maybe it's the expectation of stability. Connection was never meant to be perfect. It's supposed to ache. It's supposed to remind us that we can't exist alone. Rick understands this intellectually, but resists it emotionally, because admitting it means forgiving himself, and he's not ready for that yet. There's a strange tenderness in how he keeps trying, though. He might run, lash out, disappear, but he always returns. He always finds his way back to the people who love him. He won't call it love, won't even acknowledge it, but he acts it out anyway. That's his quiet redemption, connection as instinct. For all his talk about meaninglessness, he still moves toward meaning. Not perfectly, not permanently, but enough. Maybe that's all connection is supposed to be. Not the absence of pain, but the choice to feel it anyway. To let someone matter even when you know they'll hurt you. Rick wouldn't call that philosophy. He'd call it foolishness. But the truth is, it's the only thing keeping him human. The ache reminds him that he still belongs to something bigger than himself, not the universe, but the fragile, imperfect network of hearts that keeps choosing him despite everything. When he finally falls asleep after another long night, the ache doesn't leave. It softens. It hums in the background, quiet and constant, like the sound of a heartbeat. He doesn't dream of conquest or escape. He dreams of faces, of laughter, of home. And for a moment, the ache feels almost like peace. There will come a time when Rick Sanchez stops running, not because he's found peace, but because there's nowhere left to go. Every universe explored, every version of himself confronted, every truth stripped bare, the noise will fade, the portals will stop humming, and what will remain is silence. Not the kind that taunts him, but the kind that waits, patient, unjudging. Rick has always believed silence is the enemy, that stillness means death, but maybe it isn't. Maybe it's the one place where the noise of his own brilliance can finally rest. In that stillness, Rick will have to face the one presence he's avoided longer than any other, himself. Not the myth, not the mask, but the man beneath it. The man who has built and broken more than anyone should in a lifetime. The man who has laughed at gods and cried over ghosts. The man who made an entire universe kneel, only to realize it was never watching. For the first time, there will be no audience, no sidekick, no one left to impress or protect or push away. just Rick. And the quiet hum of a world that doesn't need him. He's always said he hates endings. But what he really fears is closure, the idea that something could finish before he's ready. He's built his life to avoid conclusions, stringing adventure to adventure like lights that never turn off. But in that final quiet, he'll understand that endings aren't failures, they're releases. Every invention, every joke, every reckless act was an attempt to control the infinite. The end is what shows him he never had to. Existence doesn't demand explanation. It only asks to be lived. Rick's quiet will not be peaceful at first. It will be filled with echoes. The laughter of Morty, the sighs of Beth, the voice of 1,000 mistakes asking to be remembered. He'll hear every argument he walked away from, every apology he never said. But he won't turn away this time. He'll listen. That's something he's never done before. Not really. Listening means letting the world speak without needing to fix it, without trying to outthink it. It means letting meaning arrive on its own terms. In that listening, he might realize that his life wasn't as meaningless as he told himself. That every bond he mocked still changed him. That every time he saved someone, even while pretending not to care, he was shaping something that looked like redemption. He'll never call it that, of course. He'll just call it doing what needed to be done. But beneath the cynicism, there will be acceptance, the quiet understanding that his existence, for all its chaos, mattered. Not because it was perfect, but because it was real. Rick has spent his life defying inevitability, but even inevitability has its mercy. The universe doesn't hold grudges. It doesn't care how many times he failed or how many worlds he broke. It just keeps expanding, offering him room to exist, again and again. Maybe that's what grace looks like. For a man like Rick, not forgiveness, not reward, just the chance to keep existing until he can finally bear it. The multiverse will keep spinning whether he fights it or not, and that realization, instead of crushing him, might finally let him rest. There's a version of Rick, somewhere, who learned that lesson earlier, a version who stopped trying to outsmart everything and started to simply observe. Maybe this Rick will become him, maybe he won't. It doesn't matter. The beauty of infinity is that every possibility already exists. The version that heals doesn't erase the version that suffers. They coexist, just as every joy coexists with sorrow, every laugh with grief, every spark with darkness. That's the truth he's been circling his whole life. Not that the universe is meaningless, but that meaning and meaninglessness live side by side, inseparable, eternal. When Rick finally accepts that, the weight he's carried will shift. It won't disappear, but it will. Settle into something bearable. He'll stop needing to fight the universe and start moving with it. Maybe he'll still drink, still build, still curse, but the edge will soften. The anger will fade into something quieter, not forgiveness, but understanding. He'll see the absurdity of existence, not as mockery, but as art. Beautiful because it's flawed, because it refuses to explain itself. In that moment of acceptance, Rick might find what he's been searching for all along, stillness without fear. He'll realize that silence isn't emptiness, it's potential. The pause before creation, the space between breaths. The quiet at the end isn't the end at all, it's the beginning of peace. He'll close his eyes, not in surrender, but in recognition. The universe hums, infinite and indifferent, and for once he doesn't need it to answer. And if he dreams, he won't dream of portals or formulas or the endless chase for control. He'll dream of the kitchen table, the clatter of dishes, the laughter of people he pretended not to need. He'll dream of being known, and of knowing others in return. He'll dream of home, not as a place, but as a feeling. The one he spent his whole life running from and never stopped longing for. Because in the end, the quiet doesn't erase the chaos, it gives it shape. Every adventure, every mistake, every cruel word and gentle act, they all belong to the same story. The story of a man who broke everything just to understand what it meant to care. The story of Rick Sanchez, who spent a lifetime proving he didn't need the universe, only to realize he was part of it all along, and maybe, in that final quiet, he'll smile. Not because he's solved it, but because he's finally stopped trying to.